This video is brought to you by Comics on Coffee. Go to comicsoncoffee.com for a 15% discount by typing in code DavidFinch. This video is all about taking a pose that we've drawn and that works, but we can just make a little bit better by working on things like overall flow, tension, and the natural limits of the human body. So I've gone ahead and started with what is a pretty good figure. Everything works pretty well. There's definitely some dynamics to the body, and it's a perfectly acceptable pose. There's really nothing wrong with it, but it's not as dynamic as it could be. And I hope you see with all these poses, the point is not to draw a terrible figure that's incredibly stiff and then fix it, which is fairly easy. It's to take a figure that is already pretty strong and just take it that next level. And so to start, the line for her hips is pretty well parallel, and the line for her shoulders is not entirely parallel, but pretty close, and that's really a very, very good starting place for us. And so what I want to do is really accentuate the angle of my shoulders and then oppose that angle with the hips. And I want to really push my shoulders back and out this way, which you'll see in just a minute. So here's my stomach. My pelvis, I really want to push this way. Not too much because I don't want to break my figure. And it's a mixture of how much you can get away with, but that still retains the essence of your pose. And that can be a little bit of a push and pull, and it can take a little experimentation. So that's already given me a body that has quite a bit more movement to it. I'm going to draw a space for my neck here. My shoulders, I really want to draw my arms back and really get a good idea that my arms are really pushed back and pushing my shoulders back. And now from here, I want to go ahead and draw her head in. I want to keep it a little bit more lined up with the line of my body. I want to angle my head down and angle my body back, which again, will just give my figure a little more tension. And I think that should do it. And now for my legs, I want to keep this leg pushed downward the way it was in the original. I think that works just fine. And the other leg, I really want to bring up and really accentuate the angle of the hips with this leg pushing the hips up and then the upper body arcing away from it. I'm going to lift this arm just a little bit higher and give it a try just like this. See how this works. Ultimately, this is always a bit of experimentation, and it doesn't work perfectly necessarily every time, and you have to be willing to try a few things that don't quite work, but then recognize when they don't work and understand the kinds of things that can help make them more powerful. And I don't think that arm's working. Let me go ahead and try and fix it again. I think that's a little better. And what I did there is I changed the angle of the arm so it's not fighting the angle of my shoulders, and it's kind of complementing it just a little bit more. I've got a lot more movement through her body. Her leg kicked out this way has a lot of force drawn through it, all the way from here, this being the low point, and then this arm being the high point that creates a lot of tension here. I could even try, and let's give it a shot. I'm going to try a couple of different angles with this leg and see kind of a difference that makes. So I'm going to bring it right down. So I've got an option like this, and that gives it more tension, but I feel like I'm losing the floating quality of my figure quite a bit there. And so I want to give it a try, bringing that leg out just a little bit this way. And I think that works pretty well. For our next figure, I wanted to start with this one right here. The pose is a little stiff, but not overly stiff. And all in all, it's perfectly acceptable. So the challenge that we have is how to take this pose here that works and make it much more powerful and much more impactful. And so the first thing that I notice is that my center of gravity is all the way back here, and maybe he's not falling over, but he really doesn't have a strong base, and it looks like you could just push him on this shoulder here and he would fall directly backwards. So the most important thing in order to fix this figure is to give him a strong weight into the ground. And the easiest way for me to do that is to bring his foot out a little bit to realign his center of gravity, but he's still kind of falling backwards a little bit, and I think if I bring his body forward a little bit, that's going to really help ground him. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to keep my angle essentially the same for the upper body, but I'm going to angle it forward. And so this is the top of my shoulders. There's my neck here. I'm just going to go ahead and draw that in. I want to be very, very simple and loose with this right now. He's looking up at us, so I don't want to drop his head and make him look at the ground. So let's try and get his head kind of lined up in there. Again, just getting the basic placement in for these figures is what's most important right now. think that's going to work basically pretty well right there. And now for his pelvis, I'm going to go with essentially the same thing that I had earlier. I want to bring this leg out of here a little bit more and this leg out a little more. And I want to really create an overall shape between those legs to really kind of bring them together. And you can see how just having a nice fluid shape between them just gives them a lot more dynamics right off the bat. His arms really don't have a lot of strength. This arm is basically being held parallel with his body, and this arm, even the upper arm, is actually pushing out at us, which is fine, but his shoulders aren't really reflecting that. If I wanted to push this out and this arm back, and let's just go ahead and do that with the same angle of the body, just quickly. So angle the body the same way, here's my head. Just as a little experiment, because I don't want to draw the figure this way, and I want to bring this arm forward. What I really need to do is turn the whole body a little bit, and then put some force down into that arm. This arm here, if I draw that back, and you can see a lot of when I'm drawing these kinds of figures, it's really reconstituting my forms. It's a little bit like sculpting almost. And then I want my hips to be the same way. For this one, what I want to do is I'm going to draw my shoulders in, and I really want to give my arms some power. And so I'm going to bring the upper arms back. And this arm is going to be fairly similar, but I really want to push that back to really draw some power across the chest. And now for this arm, I'm going to do basically the same thing. I think it's a real mistake having the arm coming out towards you without the upper body at least reflecting that a little bit. And my foot and everything was fine, so we'll go ahead and repeat that here. And we'll see how that works. I'm gonna fill up my proportions just a little bit. I want to kind of flow into my legs a little bit more and give my body just a little bit more push into this leg. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of bringing my body over this leg a little bit just to give it a little bit more push. My lower legs are really turned back, this one too, and these are really pushed back. And I feel like I've gone just a little high with the shoulder here. So you can see that my pelvis was way too high when I started. I had a line all the way up here, which is a little ridiculous. I really need to bring it way down here. And that's where you need to be able, when you're drawing this stuff, to not see these forms as absolutely is any kind of a gospel. You need to be able to morph and change them and move them around in order to get the kind of pose you're looking for. So there we go. You can see that I put a lot more thought and work into this one just by all the lines that are all over it versus this one here. And I find that tends to be the case for me very often when I try to bring a figure a little bit further. I end up really kind of working it into the page, trying to just get that last ounce of energy out of the figure and try and push it as much as I can. But my center of gravity is basically here, much better aligned between my 2 feet. So my figure is much more solid on the ground. And also with him leaned forward, he doesn't look like he could just fall over backward very easily. It makes for a much stronger figure. Before we move on with the rest of the video, I want to take a minute to talk about our sponsor, Comics on Coffee. Comics on Coffee is a family-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love all things geek. They participate in better than fair trade when sourcing their coffee beans. Just a couple of weeks ago, I got a few packages of Comics on Coffee's brand new coffee, Dark Knight Roast. I think I lucked out on this one. Dark Roast is always my favorite. This is an incredible coffee. I absolutely love it. It's got a gorgeous Jim Lee Batman on the front, and then on the back, I don't know how well you can see it here, but it has a page from Detective Comics 27. I talked to Tanya over at Comics on Coffee, and they have a range of new brands of coffee, just like this one coming up. So be sure to go to their website, comicsoncoffee.com, and keep checking back to see what they have coming. It's pretty exciting, and definitely don't miss this one. This is Dark Knight Roast, and it is a limited edition coffee, so when these are gone, there won't be any more. Thank you everyone so much for supporting the channel and for supporting Comics on Coffee. It really helps us out. All right, let's get back to the video. Now for this next figure, and I'm sure there's no real mystery about who this figure is supposed to be. All in all, the drawing is not bad. It doesn't break the rule that I felt like the last drawing did with the arm coming forward but not really being helped by the body. It's actually really perfectly aligned with the body, and so it gives it a lot of force coming out this way, and I think that works well. This arm kicks back and brings some force out and through into this arm. I feel like the head's nicely aligned with the body, but just in general, I'm really getting a very flat line through this body. And then my legs feel like they're totally disconnected from the body, and they really break right here. He could basically be sitting down. He could be on a pillow right now and shooting a web from his hand. So that's something I definitely want to fix. I do like, though, that both legs really feel like they're pushing out from this direction, and so it feels like the whole body is pushing from here out into this hand, but with this break along the hips and the body's really not having any movement to it or any directionality to it, it's a little stiffer than it could be. And obviously bear in mind, as I do these, there's so many different ways that you can go about trying to make your figures more dynamic. My solutions are really only one possible solution, and probably not the best. And so the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to just go ahead and start with a line, and I really want to angle my whole body. I'm going to use a line of beauty, which is a long curve going into a short curve. And so I want to push my whole body out into that arm, and I want his body to look like it's being pushed through space by momentum. And so I'm going to draw my upper body along that shape. Here's my arm here. The arm, I think, really needs no work at all. Let's just go ahead and draw that in. I think it was just fine. So there's my arm here. So I've got my body kind of flowing along here. I want this arm to, again, be pushed back. And I think that worked all right. I don't like how that arm is kicked up there, though. I don't know if that's just really a personal preference. And so I don't want to do that. I'm going to try and go a little bit more straight with it. To me, that doesn't look like a... In a lot of ways, you really have to think of your figures as being dancers. And you're completing movements all the way across their limbs like a great ballet dancer. And so I'm straightening that arm, and this is a choice. This is not necessarily the way to go, but I just want to give it a try here. And then I really want to push my index finger all the way out. And I think I'll even bring it maybe a little bit offline this way to really push that whole hand out and give it some power from the shoulder up through the wrist, and push energy out this way and this way on my figure. I may change that, but that's kind of what I'm going with right now. And so now I want to make sure that my hips are flowing with the rest of the body, and I don't have a break like I do here. And so I'm going to draw my hips along here. I want to draw this leg in a similar way that it was drawn here. I think that worked. And I don't want to break these figures and just completely draw a different figure. That's really not the point. The point is to try and diagnose a figure and see if you can make it just a little bit stronger. Okay, and so I've got this hip kind of kicked up just a little bit because I've got this leg lifting. It's going to kick the hip up. And so with this hip coming down, I really want to push this leg along that line and see if I can get some power through that leg. There's my knee. And now for my head, I have a few different choices, and let's try them both. So I've got my whole body kind of arcing this way. And so I can draw my head more like this. And I think this is going to be my preference, to draw my head along that line and really keep my body momentum pushing along this way. As a matter of fact, I think I just want to go with this. I like that right away. And so I think this figure has a lot more flow and energy to it. He feels like he's moving through the air and not really just kind of sitting on the ground. I said I was going to change this arm up a few times and see if we can try something different. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've got my arm back here. I'm going to try it a little bit more like how it was in the original. So there it is there. I feel like I don't like it as much. I think it's fine. I don't love it. So let's go ahead and try something like this. And all these are subtle variations, and they're all valid. So I'm pulling the arm back a little bit more, so the upper arm is much more foreshortened. And I'm turning the hand downward, so you're seeing the back of the hand. And I don't really have a reason for doing that, other than I thought it might work. And I feel like it does, but I just really liked the way that I had it originally, and I'm just going to go ahead and fix it and change it to that, which I think worked well. I was pretty happy with it, and I can still see it. I press too hard, especially when I'm doing these videos. I really want you to be able to see what I'm doing, so I try not to press too light. And I think that worked pretty well, and it's a little bit more in keeping with the original figure. All right, for our next figure, he's not falling over. If you look here, his center of gravity might even be a little bit further back, just about here. And so he's definitely leaned back, but with his foot there, he's not falling over at all, although he looks like he could very easily be pushed backwards. And because he's walking upward, it would be very difficult in this position for him to be able to shift his weight forward in order to be able to move this leg up and keep walking forward. It really doesn't look like he has any forward momentum at all. Also, I don't really get the sense that there's any weight on this hip at all because his pelvis is completely flat. And so his weight isn't deflecting this pelvis up and this pelvis down, which is what you would more naturally see. And generally speaking, his arms are very stiff and robotic. This might be a little bit stiffer than some of the other figures that we've done so far. His head definitely sits at a very uncomfortable angle with the rest of his body. It's not wrong. None of this is wrong, and all of it is perfectly acceptable, but it's just very stiff. What I want to do first of all is I want to make sure, and I'm going to draw my center of gravity, which means not much until I've started to draw a figure over it, but I want to push my figure much more over that center of gravity. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with my upper body. I'm going to bring it forward just a bit. I still want to keep my chest up. This is supposed to be a heroic pose, so I don't want to hunch him forward, but I definitely want to bring his body weight forward. Because I've got this arm back and this arm forward, I want to accentuate that just a little bit more and kind of angle my body a little more. So there's one shoulder, here's my other shoulder here. My stomach is going to go here. I really want to make sure that my hips have quite a bit of an angle. So it looks like I'm placing a lot of weight on this hip here. And you can see that my angle here and here is the same. I don't think that's going to give me any trouble. It doesn't always. If it does, we'll go ahead and fix it. And still keep his leg out. He's taking a pretty big step here. I'm going to drop this leg down. I want to angle his head more with his movement. I'm going to kind of break my rule a little bit here and have him look where he's leading. This arm, I really want to push back. And this arm here really needs to come forward. And that's a figure that has much more forward momentum. I didn't actually go as far with my center of gravity as I had initially sketched there. I think I'm more about here. But it's enough that it looks like he's got a lot of push going forward and a lot of weight into this leg. Before we do our last one, I have a couple more that are pretty similar to what we had already done, and I'm just going to go ahead and quickly show them to you. This figure here, I think, is actually very strong. There's a lot of movement down in through this arm. This other arm is coming back. I feel like the head is aligned well, and the legs work well with the body. I feel like it's a really strong figure overall, and it really doesn't need anything, but I want to go ahead and play with it and see what I could get from it. And for this one, this is what I came up with. I went ahead and increased the angle between the shoulders this way just a little bit. And then I also felt like he could be sitting on the ground a little bit in this picture, which I didn't like. I didn't really feel like he had the same level of movement, and there's a bit of a disconnect between his upper body and his lower body. Very minute, but just a little bit. I felt like angling the hips downward gave me much more of an overall flow through the whole body. So I brought this leg down, and then as a result of kicking this hip up, I wanted to really bring this foot up and out. And so I kind of reversed the feet just a little bit. This foot's back and this foot's forward. And then I brought this arm here, which I think worked really well, up just a little bit higher, just to try and increase some of the tension going down in through this arm here. And so I chose this pose for our last figure. This is not a bad pose at all. I think it works really well. The center of gravity is maybe just a little bit far back. I might exaggerate that just a little bit. So I think he could be pushed backwards. It's not really a strong pose. I think if you had somebody and he's working at, a panel and he's pressing buttons or he's doing something like that, I think it works fine. But for a strong superhero pose, it's really not what I would be looking for. And so I'm going to go ahead and first start with the head, which is turned just a little bit too far over the shoulder at that angle. I think that's basically impossible to do, and I could be wrong, but it would be very, very uncomfortable. So I'm going to alter that first. Also, with his arm forward, and I think that's fine, I really want to bring this arm back or do something different with it so I get some push through this arm going forward by using the opposite motion of this arm going back. I also want to shift his body weight much further over his front foot. He's leaning forward, and I want to have a lot of forward power into his pose. And so I'm going to go ahead and start just by leaning his body over a little more. Hold for my shoulder, my head here. I'm going to change the angle of the head a bit so it's a little more natural. Adjust my shoulder based on where I put my head there. And there's my shoulder. My arm's going to come out here. I think I want to even bend his hand in just a little bit, just to give him a little more flex in that arm. And already I'm a little happier with that. Now the other arm, I'm going to start here, and I think I want to go ahead and go upward with it like this. Sometimes I kind of have to find where my shape is there. I don't want it too high because it would make the upper arm too long. Want to make sure that it's fairly proportional. And I think that's going to work pretty well. And I'm so far much happier with that. And it was very, very simple for me to do that. I'm pulling this arm back and that pushes this arm forward. And so I want his weight to be much more forward. And so I'm going to bring his pelvis well back from where it was. And because I've got this leg back and this leg forward, I think I'm going to tilt the pelvis that way just a bit too. Just like this. In this leg, I think I'm going to bring well back. Something more like this. And my forward leg is going to be up here. Like this. And that creates a much more powerful pose. I brought his weight forward onto this foot, so he's got much more of his power coming forward in the pose. His arms look like they have a lot more power, with his arm cocking back to push this one forward. His head's at a more natural angle in relation to his shoulders. And overall, I'm much happier with that. I really like the much straighter line that pushes off from this foot, as opposed to coming out to this knee and then really kind of stopping, and it's fine, but then you're just resting on this foot. There's really no movement to this body. It's a much more static pose. All right, that's it for this one. Thank you again so much for watching. Be sure to tune in every Monday night at 8 o'clock Eastern for Monday Night Draw with Meredith and Dave, and I will see you in the next video. And I think that works pretty well. For our next figure, I wanted to start with this one right here.